Thank you, thank you. Thanks for having me. I love St. Louis for a number of reasons, not the least of which it's where my wife of 25 years was born and raised. And I'll talk more about that connection as I go through. I think it'll probably just be easiest for me to, can everybody hear me okay? Great. So this is a little photography from around our home in rural Kansas. We live about 35 miles northeast of Greensburg as the crow flies. As I said, Catherine Hart is my wife. This is a map of the night of the fateful tornadoes, and the path of the map you can see. Here's Greensburg, here's St. John where we live. We live about right here. We were 2 miles from the storm. My wife and I actually grew up in Denver, Colorado, and met my wife in 1986, and we started an organization called the Colorado Association of Nonprofit Organizations. And that was essentially like a chamber of commerce for nonprofit groups. And it was very successful, but we both got very stressed out. And we spent about a decade being unable to work and quite ill, and actually had to file bankruptcy. And Kansas is one of the friendliest bankruptcy states in the country, and we found ourselves moving to Kansas. We actually ended up exactly halfway between St. Louis, where my wife is from, and Denver, in this little sleepy little rural community. We thought it would be sleepy when we moved, had no idea what we would do vocationally as we started to feel better, though. We started a natural foods co-op. And the natural foods co-op was based in Pratt, and we had several families from Greensburg that were part of that co-op. How many have, I assume everybody here has heard of the story of Greensburg, and that's why you're here. Anybody seen the Discovery, the Planet Green series on Greensburg? Okay, there's one person that has. Discovery started a network called Planet Green, and it just happened to coincide at the time of the tornado. And so for 3 years, they told the story of the rebuilding of Greensburg. And while actually a lot of people saw it, but it wasn't a big commercial success. But the thing it did do was raise the profile of the story, which was a great story anyway. It was the first natural disaster post-Katrina. So there was a whole lot of energy going into the little tiny community of Greensburg. And so it's been a media sensation. And that's why the coverage of this little town of now fewer than 1,000 internationally has been enormous. So just to give you a little background on Kansas, on Greensburg itself, it's 100 miles west of Wichita, a really typical rural community. 1886, it was actually named for Cannonball Green, who owned a stagecoach company. Very typical architecture, very mixed, from the late 1800s and through the 60s. And then, of course, May 4th, 2007 at 9:45 p.m. It's crazy. Now it's not even that much of a surprise to talk about a storm of this size. But at the time, it was really the first of the superstorms in recent history. The average tornado is 75 yards wide. This tornado was 1.7 miles wide. Anybody who doesn't think something's happening in the atmosphere, that should wake them up. This, the little bluish, is the path of the tornado. It really dead set centered on Greensburg. Again, these kinds of pictures aren't even so shocking now. with all the storms the last few years. Last year we had we had $12 billion plus disasters in this country. So unfortunately, this is a pretty common landscape now. But in Greensburg, it was a shock to everybody in the country. It was the very beginning of Google. Are you able to get this okay? I'm sorry, great. The first use of Google satellite, first common use in the greater community. And you can see the before and after, just shocking. This town is about 2 square miles, and the tornado was 1.7 miles wide. It landed a block into the town, and it lifted on the very end of town. So it had some mystical components to it in that it really seemed to target community. Earlier that year, they had legalized liquor, which, so it had been a dry county, and they had legalized it, and there was a lot of uproar about that, and that the community was going to suffer for that. Well, the irony is, all the churches were destroyed, 8 of them. The liquor store remained. So after this massive storm, the community, there was no place to stay, obviously. The infrastructure was devastated. People spread throughout the state. In rural Kansas, much like rural Missouri, actually more so in rural Kansas, it just miles and miles and miles between communities. So nobody knew who was going to come back. And at the first community meeting, which was exactly a week after the storm, the FEMA set up this tent, and over 500 people came back. And that was actually, my wife and I, that was our first time we went to the community after the storm. And we brought a concept paper talking about the greening of Greensburg, and how if the community were to embrace this kind of strategy, that it would serve the community and the world very well. Obviously, the name of Greensburg made a lot of sense. I had done a lot of work in rural Kansas and found that the communities that were thriving were those that had a distinct identity. And so that was the pitch I made to people in the community, especially the leadership and decision makers. What the community arrived at was this mission statement: blessed with a unique opportunity to create a strong community devoted to family, fostering business, and working together for future generations. There was a major planning process. It was the first one of its kind. Again, this was the first disaster post-Katrina, and FEMA was determined to get this right. And Kathleen Sebelius, who is Obama's HHS secretary now, was at the time Kansas governor. So there was some nice creative political tension between Sebelius and Bush, and just lots of energy focused this way. So in the planning process, the community was invited in, and hey, go back. What really makes the story of Greensburg special, and I think why it resonates so much in the world, is it was kind of culturally like an old barn raising, right? In rural areas, in the olden days, when a barn would burn down, the community would get together and build the barn back. And this really is how it happened in Greensburg, but it's like the world came to Greensburg to help it come back. And we, as a community, worked toward this collective vision of being a model sustainable community. And after we did that, all these different folks and entities in the community went about their business and and did their piece of it. So it was truly like a barn raising. And again, the federal government, there were many agencies involved there, state government, within the city itself, the school district, the hospital, leaders from throughout the community really put aside their political differences and came together to make this happen. This is actually a little older picture, but it's pretty much what Greensburg looks like. There's still open areas, but dramatically different from that picture you saw the days after the storm. It was a mess. This is one of my favorite things. One of the things we envisioned early on was if this town could embrace the wind that destroyed it as an alternative energy source, it would make a huge statement, and it would be great for the identity of the town. And when you come to Greensburg now, you'll see about 20 wind turbines, including the wind farm, which is on the horizon there. This is a little map that we put together. We conceptualized the town early on, coming back as a kind of a living science museum or living trade show. So today you come to town and there are about 20 different sites that you can tour, and that's what this map is for. Actually, before I go any further, I want to acknowledge Tom Tyler, who, just go like this, Tom. He's an architect who came to Greensburg in the early days. One of my few regrets is that the city didn't hire Tom. They hired another planner, but he is a real jewel in your backyard here. He's a brilliant guy, very innovative, and I like working with him and look forward to doing more of that with Tom. So just a little bit about projects. In all of this, you can go to the Greensburg GreenTown website and look at all this stuff to your heart's desire. The hospital. Is there anybody who doesn't know what USGBC? Sorry. Close your eyes for a second. We're going backwards. Okay. Anybody doesn't know what the United States Green Building Council is? Well, I'll just explain it briefly. So the United States Green Building Council is an association that gives accreditation for buildings, and the greener the building, the higher the certification level. LEED Platinum is the highest. It's LEED Gold, Silver certified. Greensburg has the highest concentration of LEED certified buildings in the world, which it is impressive. It sounds probably more impressive than it is, only because per capita it's a tiny little community. But it was a hugely ambitious undertaking. And for the hospital administrator, the woman who was administrator at the time, she worked up as a nurse to become an administrator. And then on May 5th, she woke up, the hospital was gone. They didn't lose anybody in the hospital, but they had to treat a lot of people. Very traumatic for everybody involved. And they still, in building back the hospital, committed to this LEED Platinum design. And you'll see the old one is on the right and the new one is on the left. So she got a very nice building for her efforts. And you'll see there's now 2 wind turbines that power about 60% of that building's needs. One of the best stories, I think, in Greensburg, BTI is the John Deere dealership, locally John Deere, an icon in the Midwest. We went to them early on, and I was more intimidated by them than anybody. I thought they'd be pretty invested in the status quo, and quite to the contrary, they went above and beyond to embrace the Green Initiative and take a leadership role. They built the first LEED Platinum facility for John Deere, the corporation, who at the time had no interest in it, but these guys talked them into it, and now it is their template for new buildings in John Deere. And this is just one of the many stories of how the story of Greensburg has influenced the world. City Hall, and I don't want you to slow down and look at all the details again. You can look at this on the website. City Hall, the brick is all recovered from the power station that was destroyed. That's a LEED platinum building. Kiowa County Schools, a LEED platinum building, gorgeous building. You come to Greensburg, and I, of course, recommend that you do. That's one of the things you want to see. And everybody in the community has taken their role very seriously as host, and it's their way of paying it forward to the world, is by showing people what came out of the generosity that came to the community. And we're all about educating people to the importance of sustainability and seeing it in real world applications out in the middle of nowhere.
Is this a good time to ask if the buildings are tornado proof?
Yeah, I mean, there's no such thing as tornado proof these days. Resilience is the buzzword, and buildings are designed. There's a whole lot more concrete buildings in Greensburg now. That's definitely a tenet of sustainability, but it does affect affordability. So, but there's safe rooms in every building, and that is something we try to get that point across, that it's important. This is one of two historic buildings that were not demolished. Had a truck go through the roof of this building, and they completely gutted it, and it's LEED Gold, which is quite an accomplishment for a restored building. And again, this was a county project, not a city project. The city did all their own. We developed the, again, the concept that people could come through and they could go tour a wind farm, they could tour City Hall, the county buildings, the school, and experience all these elements of sustainability. But the one building people are most interested in generally are homes, because it's something we all live in or want to live in or have lived in. So we developed a concept called the chain of eco homes. And these are buildings that are built, they're home sized, they're essentially homes. We use them as bed and breakfast, and they're tourable all the time. And part of Greensburg, GreenTown, and GreenTown Joplin's program is to spread the concept, and ultimately we want these homes around the country. We believe that there's no better way to teach than for people to have an immersion experience in something, and it really demystifies things, especially technologies like solar. So if you come to Greensburg, you can stay in one of our two eco homes. The second one will be done, fingers crossed, in June. The round one it just showed you, that's 2,400 square feet, and the single story, the second one we're building is design competition winner, and it's 1,600 square feet. That's that one. Talked a little bit about the wind farm. So the wind farm provides renewable energy credits. It doesn't actually provide the power directly to the town, but it provides enough power onto the grid to power the equivalent of 4,000 homes. So Greensburg is now a net exporter of energy, which was really fun. And these were people who were very invested in their coal. They never saw any reason not to be burning coal. And we just said, why would you import energy when you've got these wind and sun resources in your backyard? And people were like, yeah, that's dumb. So, we often get the question, almost every time I present, probably every time. People say, how did you get an extremely politically conservative, and it's officially 80% Republican? I don't know any Democrats. So they're either in the closet or somebody's being creative with numbers. And sustainability or environmental awareness and protection has been an issue that has been deeply politicized, which is absolutely ridiculous when you think about it, because what is political about air and water and something we all share? So our task early on was to talk to people in the community and depoliticize this issue and help people understand that they had an opportunity to be a leader to the world in sustainability and responsibility to future generations with our natural resources. It's that simple. And these are, rural communities generally are very values-based. And that's what we appealed to. And it was all about reframing this discussion and getting it out of the tree hugger environmentalist realm into something much more practical. And this was kind of our driving focus in Greensburg from day one, is how do you move people and get them to respond to common challenges? Always self-interest, always. And if you're ever dealing with something that's not that, you're not going to succeed. So that was always our focus. Now, altruism and the greater good are ultimately our self-interest, and it's helping find how people get there and connecting them through that to the natural environment. So it's, again, just common sense, just getting them to understand and make a direct connection to them. One of the most effective ways that was done early on was by getting the kids in the community involved. People were really excited about kids wanting to come back to the community after college. They hadn't heard that in decades. And as this was happening, the kids were really energized by it. We were and are very careful not to use guilt and shame or fear. We try to inspire. We try to appeal to people's highest values. And again, just constantly listening and crafting a message that speaks to people and their core values. And we always get the question, how are we going to get out of this mess that we're in on a global scale? And it's no different. It's just getting people connected and to understand how it relates to them. Why are you doing this? So, again, our focus is always moving people with inspiration, hope, and vision. My favorite thing about architects, and this is something Tom does very well, and I was very disappointed with a number of the other architects in town, is you paint pictures for people. You get people excited about what's possible. And that was key in Greensburg, that we just kept going out and saying, we know you're depressed and traumatized, but just step out for a minute and look at your future and what's possible. And exciting pictures have the power to draw us toward them. And that's very much the story of Greensburg, was we just kept painting that picture. Folks, this is what's possible. This is where we can go. This is where we are going. How are we doing on time? Do you know?
7:30.
Okay. So where are we headed? Well, we as a nonprofit organization are looking to replicate what we've done in Greensburg around the country, starting with other natural disaster areas. This is something that we were developing when the Joplin storm happened. Now, Joplin's only 5 hours from Greensburg, eerily similar in a lot of ways in terms of the ferocity of the storm. 162 people died. 18,000 cars were destroyed. That still just boggles my mind. 7,000 structures destroyed. So we've gone into Joplin, and very similar to what we did early on in Greensburg, worked with city and chamber and kind of the formal leadership, while simultaneously talking with people in the community that were interested in sustainability. And this organization has been established and operating since really September, and it's fascinating to watch. It's, again, a very different animal in a lot of ways, but our mission there is to integrate sustainability into the rebuild and ultimately into the culture any way we can, using that tragedy and opportunity. And one of the things we learned in Greensburg, and my wife and I learned personally, is if you can redeem a personal loss or tragedy, it makes it somehow poetic. And so that's what you always, whoa, speaking of poetry, it's something, again, in my experience, we worked with lots of healers, from the most conventional to the most alternative, and the ones that were the most effective healers didn't have to do whether they were conventional or alternative. It had to do with how they related to the client or patient. And what we learned is you have to see the wholeness in those that are broken. You can't focus on the brokenness. You just have to keep seeing the wholeness. And again, that's what we did in Greensburg, and that's what we're trying to bring to Joplin. It's horrific. At Greensburg, there were no children lost. In Joplin, there were many children that perished. So there's trauma and scars on the community. And again, if you can somehow bring beauty in that story, it's going to make everybody feel better. In terms of what we're doing in Joplin, this is a slide. The National Renewable Energy Labs, which has been a wonderful partner in Greensburg, it's a lab of the Department of Energy, and they helped with consulting to help people building back buildings, getting them information to make them the most energy efficient possible. They just released this study, and these 13 buildings that they studied are saving the community $200,000 a year. And another university did a study that said for every dollar that doesn't leave a rural community, it has a 7-time multiplying impact on that community. So this $200,000 a year has an impact of $1.5 million a year on this tiny little community. It's huge. It's huge. And so when you talk about sustainability and tree huggers and all of that, it's like, no, this is what we're talking about, people. We're talking about this is a green neighborhood design that an architect out of Colorado did, and we're hoping to get something like that done in Joplin. We started raising money for the eco home there. The eco home in Joplin, again, will be a demonstration home, but it will also be a gathering place for people interested in sustainability at all levels. We have 2 websites, one for Greensburg, one for Joplin. We'll be doing one for the umbrella organization. And we do ask for support, and people can give in any number of ways. Cash is always a welcome one, but we also look for volunteers. We are setting up an information clearinghouse. One of my favorite things that we're working on right now is a skills bank and mentorship program, so that people that have been through this stuff can mentor people that are going through or have gone through it. Really powerful. Trust is a real issue. Tom and I were talking about this earlier today. People are in a very vulnerable state. It's hard enough getting them to build their lives back to what it was before, but to get them to think even bigger, it takes energy, it's scary. So if there are people that have been through it and said, yeah, I know how that feels, but trust me, it'll be worth it, do it. It's very powerful. Yeah.
Are you having the same success winning people to the green way of doing things in Joplin as you did in Greensburg?
Yeah, it's a little different because it's not, it's such an identity in Greensburg. So it's different, but proportionately, I wouldn't say proportionate. Numbers of people, we've got big numbers of people that are interested, and we're building that. And we've got really key people in the community interested. So ask me in a year, I'll be able to tell you better. But we're feeling good about it. We've been very warmly welcome. Greensburg, we had nobody interested in sustainability before the storm. In Joplin, there are a number of people who are like, really? There are other people in Joplin that are interested in sustainability, and we've linked them together, so that's been fun.
Joplin is a much bigger town than Greensburg.
Oh yes, Greensburg about 1,000 people right now. Joplin is 50,000 in the city and about 200,000 in the area, in the four-state area. Very different animal. So we talk about the Eco Homes program. This is kind of a flagship program for us, and ultimately we want them all over the country so that anybody interested in sustainability, wants to stay in a sustainable lodging facility, will be able to come through us and find those and learn about sustainability in those places. And Cindy is going to talk some about Earthship, which we're very excited about the possibility of having an Earthship eco home in Joplin. And there's a lot of interest in Joplin because Earthship got a lot of traction in Joplin. Dennis Weaver is from Joplin. For those of you who know, Dennis Weaver had one of the original Earthship homes. So, want to take it away?
I call myself an Earthship enthusiast. I don't know, I just discovered them a few years ago and I just kind of fell in love with Earthships, and I think that happens to a lot of people. So I've been researching them and studying them for quite a while. And I have had the pleasure of staying in one for a day in Taos, New Mexico, and I just think they're amazing, and I want one someday. So, so an Earthship is well, a radically sustainable home made of recycled materials. You can take the next one. This is Michael Reynolds. He is the inventor of this form of architecture, although it goes beyond architecture, and that's how he comes up with this term biotecture. That's his way of describing it. So he came from the Midwest originally. He studied standard architecture, and then he just decided that architecture was just on the wrong path. And so he went to the deserts of New Mexico, where he had the freedom from land use regulations and everything, so that he could kind of invent a new form of architecture, and which he did. Go ahead, next. So Earthship, what's cool about Earthships is, you know, there's lots of sustainable architecture ideas out there, but what's amazing about Earthships is that they've got everything. I mean, it's like every green thing you can imagine is like in there. So I call them the quintessential sustainable building, because they've got the standard solar, electric, and then passive solar. Like, you know, passive solar's been common for a long time, but this is kind of goes beyond passive solar. They call it solar thermal because it has such a good way of storing the heat in the walls. They have these massive walls. So it's a really effective passive solar building. And then they are built almost entirely out of recycled materials. So there's not a lot of trees being cut down for Earthships, which I think is really significant, especially for the developing world. I think this is a great solution. They also, so these are totally off-grid as far as energy use. Now, and off-grid buildings have been around for a long time, but these are off-grid for water and sewer also, because they catch the rain water, and they don't use wells. This is rainwater. They filter the rainwater, use it, and then treat the sewage on site. And the ultimate thing about Earthships is they have the capacity to even produce food within the home. So go ahead and. So here's how the passive solar part works. So in the winter, when the sun is coming in at an angle, you tend to get more solar heat in there, and then these massive walls store the heat, so that during the night and to some degree during the winter, it then releases that heat into the building, and so it does keep the building at a pretty good temperature, comfortable temperature year round. And then in the summer, when you don't want the heat in, the sun is coming down at a sharper angle, and so you're not going to get the sun into the building as much. So this is kind of a typical look of an Earthship with the sun coming in. I've been in one, and it's such a pleasant space with so much light. So of course you have the electric or wind power for the electrical systems. Go ahead. And here's a close-up of, they always have some kind of a rain catchment roof, and then coming into some sort of a filtration system and into a cistern. And then they have other internal mechanisms that go a little bit beyond the standard house for filtering and pumping the water around. So this is a bathroom. This is where my husband and I stayed. This is kind of a nice, yes, question?
What are the blue circles in the walls?
Oh, okay, those blue circles, I'll get to those in a second. Yes, notice it's kind of arty, isn't it? You keep going. Okay, so after the water is used there in the sinks in the bathroom, then it gets collected into a storage tank, and then the plantings that are by those southern windows act as sort of a gray water recycling system, or really almost a hydroponic garden. So you have this nutrient-rich water, we call it wastewater, but the plants love it. And so it goes through this kind of gravel soil mix, and by the time it gets to the end, it's clean enough that it's not really drinkable at that point by our standards, but it doesn't smell or anything. So then it gets used to flush the toilet. So this is what it looks like. So there's your gray water recycling unit. And people, ultimately people would like to grow, garden plants in it. So you can have your tomatoes and your fresh salad, fresh organic salad all year round. So go ahead. So I got this off of the Earthship Biotexture website. They said, yeah, it's February, it's 10 degrees outside and snowing, and this is what I harvested in my Earthship. So that's pretty cool. So then the water, after it's been kind of reclaimed, then it's used to flush the toilet. And then it goes outside into kind of a standard septic system. They have improved on the septic systems a little bit. And go ahead. And then, so then there's kind of a outdoor water recycling system. So this is kind of an extra step that a typical septic drain field doesn't have. And then you use this reclaimed wastewater then to water your outdoor plantings. And a lot of Earthships are built as kind of this barn raising type model, where the company Earthship Biotexture brings in interns and all kinds of things, and they can put one of these things together in just a few weeks, which is kind of fun to see. So to build an Earthship, this is the basic building material of an Earthship, which Michael Reynolds calls indigenous materials, meaning this is a building material that's available all around the world for nothing. Go ahead. And so you take these tires and you fill them with dirt, and you pound the dirt in there so it's hard. And this is a pretty old building technique called rammed earth, but it's got this extra innovation of steel belted containment of the rammed earth. And so you create these big foundation walls, and these are kind of just on the top of it are aluminum cans stacked with an adobe plaster to make a little form for concrete. So they use an adobe plaster. It's basically on-site dirt with some sand and maybe some straw and other things mixed in. And they smooth down the tire walls so that it's just this natural plaster. And when I first heard about it, I thought, do I really want a house that has dirt for walls? I mean, there's something kind of weird about that. But when I actually went to Taos and lived in Earthship and got to touch the walls and, just like, what is that like? It was really nice. It was actually very beautiful. It's kind of this, earth tone, obviously. But they finish it off with a linseed oil. So it actually has a really nice, hard, smooth surface that's really pleasant. Okay, so here's those round things we saw on the walls. So for the interior walls, a lot of times Earthships have, they just take bottles that would have otherwise been thrown away. They saw them in half and they make bottle bricks out of them. And then, and this is Michael Reynolds, setting these bottle bricks into the adobe plaster and making walls. And it's just a way of forming a wall. It's, you know, without using wood or any other thing. So this is what they look like they're kind of arty. And they have this nice way of bringing the light through them. So Michael Reynolds, this is his home base. He's built a whole community of off-grid Earthship houses in varying densities. This is just outside of Taos, New Mexico. And this is interesting that the Dennis, I didn't know the Dennis Weaver connection here, but so I wanted to show you just the full spectrum of Earthships that I've seen out there. So this is Dennis Weaver's home, which was a 8,500 square foot luxury home that's an Earthship. And I don't think his is completely off-grid, but he has a very small utility bill. I mean, it's tiny. Compared to other 8,500 square foot homes. But so it's very classy. And then here's on the other end of the spectrum, this is a small Earthship that was built on the Lakota Indian reservation. And I think, you know, going back to kind of this vision of GreenTown, Kansas, I'm kind of fascinated with this group and I kind of want to follow where they go with this. The Lakota Indians have spent they had kind of a 7-generation plan for the Indian nation of just assimilating and learning to deal with Western culture. And now they're ready to create another 7-generation plan for self-sufficiency. And the two major elements that they're talking about doing is bringing back the buffalo and building Earthships, because it's a way for their tribal elders to live, you know, an independent life and not have to worry about being in the cash economy and paying their, you know, having their electricity shut off in the middle of the winter and freezing. So that's a big problem for them. So I think, you know, it's an interesting solution for a lot of different groups. So I'm just going to zip through. This is the design that's being planned for the Joplin project, which Daniel's group is working with the Earthship Biotecture, with Michael Reynolds' group, his company. So you can just kind of click through. So there's the foundation wall. Now this is a design modification to try to be a little bit tornado resistant. So the roof, rather than just being a flat roof, this is a rebar and wire mesh domed roof. And then that's the kind of the interior greenhouse wall, and then they'll cover it with concrete and then build some exterior walls around there and cover it with dirt and then a concrete slab, so that this is now your water collection is just a concrete slab. There's a cistern in the back, and it all gets filled in. So this, you know, it just really tucks the whole thing into the soil around. So I don't think that roof is going to blow off too easily. And here it is in the front with the greenhouse. So you have that kind of front greenhouse effect, and that's where your gray water recycling is, and you can grow your banana trees or citrus trees or tomatoes or whatever you want. There's that thing on the top is a vent, like a skylight vent thing, and that would be the finished look. And so they can make it larger by you can just keep adding rooms along, you know, along that common hallway. So that's what is kind of the vision of that one building, and I will give it back to Daniel.
Are there any questions?
With the Earthships that are going to be around here, are they going to incorporate like wood heat efficient wood stoves, that kind of thing, underwater, underground, floor heating with hot water circulated somehow in the winter time. You said it was 10 degrees above zero in that one house you were at. And I didn't know, is there enough sun coming in to keep it warm, or do they have other sources of heat?
Yeah, Earthships, I've never heard of any Earthships that have radiant floor heat. I think it's just the sun warms it up enough. Yeah.
I also understand that there really aren't many trees in the desert to use for wood stoves, but up north, more around here or further north, are there any Earthships up in this area anywhere? Besides the one that's going in the job, you know?
As far as Earthships in the Midwest,
Yeah,
I know
Minnesota, Wisconsin.
there's one in Iowa. I know there's one in Ohio that's pretty famous, and they do tours and things.
Okay.
It's in eastern Ohio. That's all that I know of. And I know that there are Earthships in the works in Missouri, like in south central Missouri, but I don't know how far along they are. So just Joplin Earthship would be the first really,
Really?
like one that people can visit.
Okay.
You know,
it's
that-
gonna be built between the Earthship biotecture people and your group, and it'll be done within a certain amount of time. It won't just sort of drag out very much.
Yeah, I understood from talking with the Earthship biotecture folks that the plan was to try to build it this spring. And like I said, they do these things where they just bring people in and they can build it in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of raising the money for the materials. They're trying to raise $15,000 just for the, just materials. And then they're donating the labor and the design and everything else. Yeah.
So they're not looking for labor around here, are they, will you be able to watch it go up kind of
Can you
thing?
volunteer? That's what she needs.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think there would be volunteer opportunities if you're interested.
They actually do like an internship. That's how they train people, and that's how you don't have to pay for the process, because
Right.
people are getting essentially accredited in it. Did you have something, Tom, in terms?
I was going to tell everybody we have a good example on an Earthship of Bob Casella that ran City Museum, was probably one of the most ingenious people in the country as far as recycled material and how to use it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything from bottles and glass to, if he could find it and use it, he used it. And the City Museum is a great example of a whole bunch of that type of instruction.
That's a really good point. It's an amazing resource. Yeah.
How do you go about overcoming the resistance from the organized local governments? In the case of Joplin, they've got rules. It's not like where you can go in New Mexico and make up your rules as you go. We live out further west here, and we have a neighbor who was denied solar panels up the road.
A big issue,
Unanimous vote.
zoning.
So,
Yeah.
so how do you, if you just want to put one in a neighborhood, for instance, how do you go about convincing these people that it's not a vote, it's just.
Well, that's exactly what you've got to do is get grassroots support for it on the front end, because if you surprise people with it, and a lot of people like conformity, and it's reflected in a lot of neighborhoods, and so you have to choose where you go carefully. I mean, in a place like Joplin, it's not a fight we want to take on. We really want to cultivate interest for the overall concept, and that the Earthship is a cool, innovative project, and hopefully build a lot of community support so then it's easy. That's the ideal. We'll let you know how that goes. Tom?
In a lot of cases, it's a community, and they reacting to the very first person showing up that says, I want to do solar panels, for instance, in Ladue, places like that. then when you have a meeting like this, and 10 more people show up and say, well, I'd like solar panels, except you guys have an ordinance against it, and we'd like to know how to do it properly. And then the city starts thinking and goes, maybe we ought to rework our ordinance to allow them. And all of a sudden, they don't become ugly, they just become part of architecture today.
And what you're doing here is exactly the kind of thing that needs to happen in communities. It's grassroots organizing and demonstrating support and interest. It has a lot of power. The one thing Michael Reynolds and I talked about the project, and he said that $15,000 project will be $45,000 if it has to meet code. And it just gives a whole different understanding of sustainable. It's like, whoa, $30,000 to meet code. That's, you know, that's a huge amount of money on a $45,000 project. So it opened my eyes to codes, to the downside of codes. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
What kind of codes are you talking about, like electric?
Plumbing mostly. Black water is not, black water and gray water. So black water is sewer water, gray water is just any other water that's been used. We're just kind of, you know, it's like cheap energy. We just got so used to cheap energy that we don't even think about energy anymore. It's how it is with water. It's going to change really rapidly. I just was at a Xeriscape conference in New Mexico, and they had a guy who does forecasting water talking about water. I was shocked. I was shocked the shape that we're in when it comes to water. It's crazy. It's crazy.
In St. Louis, we have some of the cleanest and best tasting drinking water in the country. Everybody knows that. And yet in the city, one of the major problems is because of the early St. Louis construction, there's still places where sewage and stormwater are mixed. And one of the main things the EPA is trying to do is get the city to clean it up at a huge expense. But there's places like that where I mean, like right around Forest Park and the Science Center, there's stuff where everything's mixed together and dumped into the Mississippi, fortunately, south of St. Louis. Or somewhere.
I was wondering when you showed all the filters for the water. So I know in my fish tank, those filters have to be cleaned once in a while. What's involved in those filters, the ground, the earth where the plants are growing, that are filtering gray water, and I just wanted to kind of sticking up stuff.
Oh, okay. You're saying, do you have to redo your filters?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I've not heard any discussion of that.
And I think they're mostly to filter out sediment and debris, and it probably breaks down over time, but I don't know. This guy had a
Yes, about a year and a half ago, I heard Mary Sweet, who was the hospital administrator, talk about her experience and the hospital experience. But wasn't she one of the first to go for the green for her hospital?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was very much a bandwagon effect. I mean, there were all these community meetings early on, and you saw as people started to get enthusiasm and say, yeah, this is a good idea, I want to do it, that other people were like, ooh, well, I want to do it too. I mean, it's very human. But she was definitely one of the early adopters and said, we'll do what it takes and make it happen.
Yeah, hooray for her leadership.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, amazing.
Two quick points. I have a solar home in Colorado and facing south, of course, and the solarium heats the air that goes into the living room and drops into the bedroom and then down a double wall on the north side of the north rooms. But this year and last year, we are now having to keep track of the water we use from our well. We have to check the meter and turn in the readings.
Yeah, just the importance. I mean, we're going there very quickly. One of the things that this professor points that he made about water. So 97% of water on Earth is salt water. 2% is in the ice caps, very quickly running into the oceans. 1% is fresh water. And that includes our aquifers. And he was saying that we'd be fine if we used our aquifers as an emergency backup. But instead, we've been using it as a primary water source now. And so, yeah, I mean, in Greensburg, in that area, the farmers and the irrigation is huge. The amount of water used is crazy. And the government is trying to crack down now and say you can't be taking all that water. And it's politically, it's really interesting. Oklahoma, and Texas where the drought had been, it's a mess. If they have another summer of drought, there are places that have no drinking water, and they don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, our rancher, has a certain amount of water he can use on his fields. He can drive a car down on the road and get the wind to blow the water on the car. And people across
Yeah.
the highway say Franklin's not letting us get the water that we should have.
What I learned at the Xeriscape conference too is rainwater catchment and use is becoming much more common in dry areas. Like New Mexico gets 6 to 7 inches of rainfall a year, but that's enough for a family if you catch it and store it. And the technologies, I mean, what Cindy showed that Earthship does, that's really basic compared to what a lot of these people are doing. They ranchers that have massive cisterns that are capturing rainwater. The school at Greensburg has, I think, 3 50,000-gallon cisterns that catch rainwater for reuse.
And actually, professionally, I work in the wastewater industry, and I was just at a conference last year where the keynote theme of the whole conference was that wastewater is the new water resource. I mean, that's cities. Cities are turning to wastewater, sewage, as the new water resource because there is no other water resource to tap.
San Diego.
San Diego.
It's 8 o'clock. If you need to go, feel free to. I think Daniel and Cindy would be happy to stick around to answer some more questions. And I really hope that you found this as uplifting and as inspirational as I did. The Green Speaker Series has never had a speaker before that has asked for donations. I hope you agree with me that this is a very worthy cause to help Joplin and Greensburg rebuild green. And this is not a habit. The Green Speaker Series will not become a donation-seeking series of events, but please consider donating to the GreenTown organization. And let's thank Daniel and Cindy.